but
It's better.
I think we're I think we're
we can
okay
move
now.
on. Okay, so John, we had voted, or we were in the middle of voting, and I was waiting to see if you would be willing to approve the minutes or not.
I approve.
Okay, so everybody else's hands were up, so that does pass. Moving on to old business and review of the community seasonal photos and videos. Melissa had asked if I wanted to rerun the same photo request in the Roadrunner, so that ran again. Sue, did we have any
No
additional? Okay,
ones.
so I mean, I think when I was looking at it, I saw a mixture of all the seasons that appeared to some extent anyway. So I think that's great. So we did try to engage the community again for that, but we've got what we have now. So I'm not going to ask her to run it again, especially if we didn't receive any more. Yes, Peter?
Yeah, and I was pleased to see the work people in the pictures.
Yes, yes. And then on the next item, we have just an updated listing of our community businesses and associations. Denal had gotten a hold of the Secretary of State and gotten a list from them, and you had said they offered it for free.
Yes.
So feeling generous, I know.
Yes.
So that has been added to the entire list that we seem to have now. So I would say we have a pretty comprehensive idea of at least who our business owners are in the community. Any further discussion on that?
What does SOS stand for?
Secretary of State.
Oh, okay. I should know that.
I used to work there.
Next was discussion of the impact fees. It looks like in our packet that was included. Sort of for more information. I know that Chris last month had touched on it. I didn't give it a really good look over, admittedly, before the meeting. Ben, would you have anything to add regarding impact fees? Chris had mentioned that you have some experience with that.
Sure. Yeah. It's essentially what was included in the packet was an overview of impact fees in surrounding communities. And an impact fee is a one-time fee that's typically charged when a building permit is issued. And that goes to cover the increment of capital costs associated with improvements that are generated by that new development. So whether it's demand for new open space or demand for road improvements or other capital facilities in town, it's a way for a town to have new development essentially pay at least a portion of its own way toward improvements that are required by new development. So I don't know if there was a specific action that Chris was looking for, or if this was provided more of for an informational purpose, or if he was looking for some kind of opinion or a vote that would go back to the select board. But it's certainly common in growing communities to at least consider impact fees for various purposes.
Peter?
Yeah, I can give a little backstory. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to watch the select board meeting where Chris presented basically the letter that he put in the e-packet to the select board. So this was his thoughts, bringing it to the select board for their attention. I'm conflicted, not conflicted, but from what I was able to gather, the select board was largely in favor of impact fees, especially looking and seeing what Wyndham has done. And Chris had mentioned that he had experience with them when he was working in Wyndham, and that Ben had experience with them as well. I think that, like with anything, the select board really did see an opportunity for revenue. I think Chris had described it the last time he gave us an overview, is that really the philosophy is it's growth paying for growth. So that's the idea. I just caution as far as, and certainly we would do this, is looking at all the potential unintended consequences that come with that. So, as an example, if you use a real meat cleaver approach rather than a scalpel, my understanding is that what you can do is you can drive up the cost of housing. You can cause issues with discouraging development. Now, I don't know what the philosophy of this committee is as far as discouraging development. I think that if we hang a sign out on 302 and say that that's the purpose of this committee, we're probably going to get a lot of feedback, especially from the commercial community, that no, we are absolutely anti-development. So all I'd say is I think that had Chris been here, my response, I'll make it anyway, is that in viewing that interaction with the select board, they saw an opportunity for revenue, that it is money that is one time, as Ben said, that it really doesn't fall on the property owner. It falls on new property owners. It falls on developers. And I guess my experience with the economics is basically, generally the developer's simply going to pass the cost on to the buyer. That's kind of how the economy works. So I just, what Chris did is used an example of this 25 unit development that's going up right off of 85. Right just before it gets to 302. I'm sure most of you have seen that going on. And the fact that had there been a impact fee because of the number of cars that's going to put on our roads or the number of kids that's going to put in our school, that would have, that's growth paying for growth. And yet we don't have anything on the books. And I think what the select board, Ben, was asking for is, we'd like to get started on this. I applaud Chris in saying, well, I'd like to bring it to the comprehensive plan. They said, yeah, that's good, but we want to get this done. So it really needs to go to the planning board. And that really means that the select board has to say to the planning board, we'd like you to explore how we can develop ordinances for impact fees. But as a courtesy to us, and certainly because Chris is involved with this committee, he brought it up to the selectmen. I appreciate that. Long term, I think we can deal with impact fees. And I'm just putting in that caution that there are potential unintended consequences, and that the example that Chris used, if I'm not mistaken, and I wanted to clarify when he was here, but that area basically, I think in 2004 was included in the revised statutes through the recommendation of the Comprehensive Plan Committee at that time to make it village. So it changed the zoning in that area to village in order to reduce the lot size, in order to encourage homes and families. But if you put an impact fee on that, that drives up the cost. So when we start talking about what's affordable and what's not, there is a concern with that as well for me. So I'd say, the scalpel versus the meat cleaver, and looking at that, it would have to be highly individualized. I see a potential. So if we're trying to follow in the footsteps of 2004, which was to designate or move residential development to the village area, and one of the carrots we put out there was to say, well, now you only need an acre to build, and it's right along 302, and who knows what's coming with sewer or water or anything else, but if it's going to happen anywhere, it's probably going to happen there. And so I understood all of that. I guess my question is, can you use something like an impact fee and then use that as a incentive, or to incentivize the builders, the developers, and the investors, and say, yep, there's a $3,000 impact fee for every unit you put in here. But if you guarantee to the town of Raymond that 10% of those buildings will be affordable, we'll waive that fee. So
There you go,
it's
Pete. Yeah.
so it's a
Nice.
tool, something that could be used. But
Yeah.
it takes a lot of thought. I'm sure it's before we even really get started on it, the planning board's gonna be hard at work at it. Because I gotta tell you, if you have an opportunity, watch that select board meeting. But there was a little bit of a, I don't know what you call it exactly. I guess it would be a ching.
If I may, being on the Budget Finance Committee, I was hearing about these impact fees a little bit earlier, and I mean, I kind of mirror what Peter says. They're going to be passed to the consumer. With the housing not being affordable now, it's just going to add an extra bit on top of it. So my thoughts on it is not to go full steam on this thing. I think that every committee should be looking at it. I think our committee especially, but obviously like the selectmen are going to have this say no matter what, but I think that we should be given a little more time, and if there is even more time, I don't know if they're coming to vote on it or anything soon, but I mean, this is more impactful than just making a couple of bucks. This could sway our builders for good, or it could also sway it for, you know, making housing not affordable again in Raymond. And to keep families coming in, we do need the affordable housing. And I think that this is something that needs a little bit of time before we just say, yeah, this letter looks good, let's go for it. So I don't know what their timeline is, but I would just kind of caution and say, hey, we should be a part of this thing. We should really look it over. We should get more information, and we should definitely have a say, whether it's in front of the selectmen, kind of what our thoughts as a committee are. And I think that we're going to be kind of split, as kind of Peter was saying. Like, there's good and there's bad with it. We just want to know all the pros and we want to know all the cons. And as a committee, I think that we should be able to say, this is, as our committee, this is where we land on it.
Yes.
I might suggest that if this moves forward, that we might have a joint meeting with the other committee.
You know, Frank, I think that, you know, and I kind of felt this from the beginning, and so I was glad that Ben included it on some of the responsibilities that we could assume. So I'm seeing how we facilitate or move some of these things we're going to be doing department head interviews. So some of us are going to be sitting down with the chair of the planning board and saying, and by the way, you know, what do you think about the idea of impact fees, and have you thought about it, and where would you be going with it, and this is where the community's coming from, and you know, oh, by the way, what about LD 2003? What are you thinking about that? And what have our lawyers said about that? It's those type of things. So I see that as a value in sitting down and talking, interviewing all the department heads. You know, personally, I come from a medical background. I'm anxious to sit down with fire safety and talk to them a little bit about the future of medical response in the town.
Go ahead, Greg.
I'm not on the budget committee, I know Sean is, and one of the budget committee members, which is not Sean, it was another one, said that the Raymond Rec does pay its own way, and I noticed that Chris put in new tennis courts are needed, and maybe an impact fee ought to consider that. If there's a department that's paying its own way, and it maybe doesn't need the impact fees to do whatever they want to do, maybe make the impact fees exclusive. But I'm a real fan of, I'm like you, I'm not a real fan of trying to increase the cost of building a home
Or I'd like to say, my sense is that it certainly is something that's in your toolbox that you can use to negotiate and to at least be trying to accomplish. If in fact this committee feels that we need to continue the effort to basically move development onto the 302 corridor and develop that area that's now designated village, which doesn't require the larger lots, which would hopefully then drive more affordable houses and that sort of a thing. But as far as, Sean, to your process, and when you said that before the select board make their decision, and really my understanding of the process is the only decision the select board will do with this is decide whether or not they're going to endorse the planning board advancing an ordinance change, which then goes to the town. So that's the process. Ultimately, the town would decide, which is, you know, it always makes me feel better. So,
And Madam Chair, to add to that, this year's warrant is set, going to the printer, going to be on the ballot. So the earliest that impact fees could be instituted would be with next July. Not this coming, but 2024.
Yeah, I found interesting in reading about them that the developers or the investors basically can apply if it's affordable housing, they can apply for a federal tax credit, so that they can actually get they can recover that money for the impact fees that they end up paying. But I mean that's an incentive. That is another tool for leveraging what a developer puts in an area, and I'm certainly all for that. It's just that like just about everything else, ultimately it's the user that pays for it anyway. So the developer or the investors, they can get a tax credit, not the people that bought the house.
I'm not myself convinced it would necessarily drive developers to go somewhere else, just because, just looking at this comparison, all of our surrounding towns are charging an impact fee.
Yep.
But I think, as long as we weren't exorbitantly more, and we're sort of in line with our surrounding towns, that it probably wouldn't impact whether a developer would want to be here or not. I really like the idea of an incentive, or a little carrot. But I think ultimately everything we do is pushed on to our taxpayers. So whether it's an impact fee, if the town wants tennis courts, we're either going to get it from an impact fee or raising your taxes. So either way, taxpayers are going to pay for it. I think it's determining how that gets divvied out is the key here.
Frank, when you were talking about joint meeting, were you talking about us sitting with?
a planning board.
I don't think that's a terrible idea. I really like that
I
idea.
think whatever they do is really going to affect whatever we recommend. So I would like to be on at least the ground floor of understanding how they're thinking, so that they can also look at what we're thinking about
Sure.
when it comes to housing and affordability.
And I'd say one of the things that pays the dividend is just finding the time to watch their meeting.
Yep.
I mean, so much information is revealed, just like these meetings are revealed in the meetings. And the first time that I heard about the LD 2003 was listening to a planning board meeting. Yeah, that was an interesting discussion. Anyway.
Okay.
Well, the planning board has no meeting next month. I don't know if it would be too soon to try to organize a meeting with them, but if they have nothing on the agenda, we'd be a captive audience, I guess.
Yeah, I would think that what we'd want to do is get some questions in advance and kind of be prepared, rather than just bring them in and go willy-nilly. But I'm certainly, I'm with Frank. I think meeting with them is great. Interviewing the chair would be great.
All right, great. Let's move on to our new business, and that's committee member interest in conducting department head interviews.
So that's done. No, I guess my question would be for North Star would be, what would you be able to supply us with, let's say, guidance and pertinent questions, stuff that you would need to from background material or whatever for putting together the different components.
Yeah.
Certainly not discouraging you guys from talking to them as well. I'm sure you will.
Well, I think that the intent from our point of view at this point is really to provide some high level prompts, some basic questions that you could ask department heads about visioning level, like high level, broad category types of issues, like what are the biggest opportunities, what are the biggest threats, kind of questions. And we could send, Kate is not here this evening, number one, and it sounds like maybe before I came in you had a chance to meet Sam Pikus. Sam is associate planner at North Star, and she and Kate are going to be the regular attendees, but Kate is unavailable this evening, so I'm her stand-in. So Kate had sent along about 7 or 8 different examples of questions that would be a good starting place for department head interviews, and some of the things we'll talk about in a little later in the agenda. And there certainly will be other things that you may want to ask certain department heads, like related to emergency response, or if you have a conversation with the planning board chair about legislation that the town needs to react to. They go beyond these questions. Certainly would encourage you to do that, but I think there's probably going to be like a certain set of foundational kind of questions that we want to get input from each department head on individually, so that we have some structure and some common questions. It'd be interesting, I think, in this work to like find out if there are common themes and responses to some of those common questions, so that at least a certain level of consistency would be important. So we can send those to the town for distribution, and we can talk about if you need something more formal than that to kind of go into a conversation. But we at least want to like help with some of the basic framework as you handle the logistics and the actual interviews.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question. It looks like, if I know the timeline's not, precise per se, but department head interviews are in task 1 and, possibly done early summer. Should we try to stick to that?
Yes. I think that those can happen really at any point, starting as soon as next week. As soon as they can be conveniently rearranged. I noticed, Kayla, that you were referring to the original proposal.
Yes, I'm sure. I don't have the newest one.
And we had, I wish I had it electronically here, but we had rearranged at last month's meeting based on that conversation. All the task 1 activities and task 2 activities are now going to be more or less running at the same time. And we'll talk more about our vision for that and how we can kind of coordinate on some of those things.
Peter.
Yeah, so 2 things. Sue, could you put together a listing for the committee of the department heads along with their contact information? I mean, we could dig it up off the website, but probably be quicker and easier for you just to...
Yeah, most
Send
of it
that.
I have at the top of my head.
Sure, okay. And then secondly, as far as the, once we have that listing, would it make sense to go around and find out who among us would either have experience, expertise, or an interest in interviewing? I don't see, just 1 or 2 of us doing the interview, but I would think it would be better if well, let's say as an example, if someone went to the planning board who happens to already be on the planning board, or if someone went to talk to the people in budget finance that's already on the budget, and I'm just making those suggestions. But I would think that, if people are willing to do those things, then we all gain from it. You've already got some experience with the people there, and we could get the questions from Ben and just discuss among ourselves any other questions, or you might have, personal questions. Like I say, for fire safety, rescue, medical responses, I got a pile of questions for them as far as where they see their needs going to be in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And you could also use this building for some of the interviews.
Yes.
Because at least for me, getting away from the telephones, the front end, et cetera, it would be, might be better to come somewhere here.
Yep.
Like here, I should say.
Well, I personally wouldn't mind doing as many as I possibly could. Just because I want to see everybody. Mostly.
I think that's one of the advantages of the makeup of the committee as well. So we're all very familiar with the players.
Yeah.
Are you more interested in like a one-on-one, or having like a couple of people come to like a meeting of ours where we can all kind of, it doesn't have to be every single one, but scheduling reasons and stuff like that. Maybe somebody's more available on a Wednesday night.
I mean, I think if we could, you know, yes, of course, we could try to get a few department head while we're here even. You know, it's a good use of our time. We're all here together. I just want to be careful that we're being mindful of their schedules and meeting loads, you know, after hours kind of thing. But I think that's a great idea. You know, we could say, hey, we meet on, you know, the first Wednesday of every month. Would anybody be willing to come join us for a meeting? And that might be a way to knock off some of them.
And then individual interviews with department heads, the one individual from the committee or the two people from the committee that do it, that they just come back and report back to this committee, you know, with, let's say, the targeted questions we'll get from Ben that are really going to be useful for them in developing the plan. Then any additional questions that we have or that, you know, ask the people across the street. By the way, I'll be talking about, I saw the ambulance in your driveway a couple of weeks ago. You know, how'd things go? And I'm letting you know, I'll be talking to the chief next week. And you got anything that you want to share? I mean, all those things are just helpful as far as being able to formulate what questions you want to ask. But my understanding is our charge is to be looking at Raymond in 10 or 20 years. That's probably the hardest part of this. You know, especially for the older folks. You know, but looking ahead, you know, 10, 20 years and thinking about things like infrastructure and how do you pay for it. And boy, it sounds awful good to have growth pay for growth. How do we do that?
Yeah. I think it's inevitable we will have growth. There's nothing we can really do about it. So yeah, I suggest we get a list of them, reach out and say, you know, here are some options, figure out what would work for most of them and go from there, and for ourselves, and get a couple of us together and pick away at them.
I heard tonight 18,000 was the increase in the population last year, and that actually there was, for the state, and that there was actually none of it came from births, because deaths exceeded births. So they came from elsewhere.
Moving in.
Yes, I think they're all moving into Portland, actually. All right. Great. So I think we've got sort of an action plan on that one. I'm going to move on to the public participation plan, which is all you, Ben and Sam.
Great, thanks. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of review that updated approach to the scope. We're going to talk about the survey, the website, and some more specifics about public outreach, which is a big focus of this group's work over the course of the summer. That's a lot of task 1 items in the scope. And then Sam's going to talk about the inventory chapter work. Actually, that's task 1. The visioning work and the public outreach is task 2. So we'll start with task 2. So I did bring a printout from Kate, who, as I mentioned earlier, is not here this evening. And we had spoken a little bit last week about how to enable this group to basically be the ambassadors, doing a lot of personal outreach. That was one of the things that this group had volunteered to take on as part of a pretty important role in the short term over the course of the summer, and particularly in regard to some of the meetings that road associations and lake associations are going to be having their regular meetings. So we want to be pretty efficient about getting this group ready to start inviting themselves or showing up to these meetings, whether it's as an official agenda item on a regular meeting of a group like that, or if it's just showing up and trying to grab 5 minutes at the beginning or end of a meeting. And the idea here is that this group, using some of the contact info that has been included in the packet tonight, or some of your own personal connections into different groups in the community, would be, number one, making folks aware that this project is underway, and it's something that they should stay tuned and up to date on. And number two, at the same time, invite them to provide some of that high level information that I talked a little bit about a few minutes ago in regard to the department heads. So because we shifted this task 2 work, which is that public outreach work, earlier into the project over the course of the summer, we'd originally envisioned that happening more like late summer, fall kind of time frame. We're going to need to hustle a little bit over the next couple weeks to make sure that number one, we're prepared for those things that are going to be happening, but also we don't have the kind of information to share with the community that we normally would have if we had a complete set of inventory chapters or a online survey that we could share the results of. So I think from our conversations in the office, it seemed like the goal of this outreach over the summer should be focusing on awareness and that high-level visioning input. So we've got some sample questions that we can go over this evening, or at least give you a flavor of. And we wanted to talk with you, and hopefully before we move on to the other items, we can make some decisions about how best to ask for the information we need from the community, whether it's handing out business cards with a website link that they can go to fill out things online, or if it's filling out a paper survey, kind of multiple choice or short answers, and then giving it back to members of the committee before you pack up and leave from your attendance at a meeting like this. So there's a number of different ways to think about how to get that information back. So I think the first part is really, what do we want to ask for, and then how do we collect that information? So I had mentioned we had some sample questions, and they're really, as I mentioned, high-level visioning type questions at this point, where we are not, we want to hear from the community early in the process, because we don't have a lot of nuggets and highlights to share with folks. So some of the questions could be, what are the best things about living in Raymond? What are the biggest threats to the quality of life in town? What's the one thing you wish you could see in Raymond or change about the community? How would you describe Raymond? So short answer, broad, high level kind of things that if we can get a few hundred responses, we can start to form a picture of what some of these foundational values are, as well as starting to get a sense of the community's vision. What are the elements of a vision statement going to be? So that's really where we're coming from as far as specific questions. We're probably going to have a little bit more detail when it comes to asking for things from department heads who are in the business of thinking about the community's future every day, versus trying to grab 10 minutes at a meeting of another group, or thinking, if you go to the regular business meeting of the Little League, they might be able to give 10 or 15 minutes, but they've got a lot of other things they need to do. So that will shape the kind of questions and maybe how many questions you could ask. And it's also, I think, going to lead into that second part of it, of how do you collect that information? Are you going to go to a meeting of a lake association or a youth sporting group and hand out papers and pencils and say, all right, fill these forms out, I'll give you 10 minutes, and then pass it up when you're done? Or are you going to hand out a business card or something with a QR code or a website that just ask people to fill it out when they get some time? So thinking about it, our preference would be something more like the latter. I think it'd be a little easier for you to not worry about the number of pens and papers and collecting all the sheets that you pass out, but more along the lines of a broad awareness and passing out as many website links as you can, and making it as available to the public as you can at this early stage. So any thoughts on the questions themselves or the approach to the work?
Peter, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I'd just say that, Kayla, what was the number of respondents that we got at the election?
Oh, Peter, that was too long ago. Was that not? So I think we had like 900 votes, which meant 300-ish
300 responses.
people. So we
right.
had a lot, and that was definitely the one-on-one, the hey, what's going on with all these pom-pom things. I think that, I mean, that was engaging. So just on that level at the election, we had a good response.
I'm just thinking that, I mean, certainly there's much more in the way of collecting data and thoughts on the public, but that we've already got some of that information.
Mm-hmm.
They were very broad questions, or I guess you'd say high-level questions, basically taken from the state management plan, the questions that they would ask. Growth management plan.
Mm-hmm.
So things like water quality, things like the importance, rate your top 3, and we think we gave them 7 or 8 selections that came off of that growth management plan that were basically just the chapters, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's most important to you in the next 10 years? And I think the options were municipal services, land use. I'd have to
Housing,
go back.
economy,
Housing.
Infrastructure, natural resources.
Thank you.
Very good. So, well, once again, just to throw that in there, I mean, we've got a little bit of work already done there as
Yeah.
far as.
Great.
Yeah. My initial thoughts sort of, I'm sorry, John, just a second, is that we have a really good email list of all these associations. We know who some of the players are, whether it's, emailing our Little League and, as you mentioned, like, I think shooting them out an email saying, here, this is what we're doing, this is the phase we're in, we're starting to collect information. Because I think realistically, while we may be able to personally attend some of these things that are happening, we can't hit them all. So, being able to say, here is some information, these are the questions, would you mind spending, 5 to 10 minutes of your meeting, asking this, and maybe that's a way for us to collect data. Just a thought where we've already done some of that legwork of collecting who are the people in our community.
Do we have time between now and the election in June to get questions ready and a card that we could go to the polls once again, grab them for a couple of minutes? Hey, would you go to this website? And there are a list of questions, and we would love to have you respond to them.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
I mean, it worked the first time.
Sure did.
There's one caveat
John.
with the election.
Oh.
This is only a municipal election. Turnout is not going to be potentially what you saw last November.
No, but 10 people
It will still be people,
is,
yes.
if we get 100, 150, 200 people, that's 200 people, half of them
There's-
respond.
You won't get, none will get by. If there's only 100, Frank will talk to every single one of them, so I can see an advantage there. John, I know you had something to add.
It seems like we had success with the SurveyMonkey tool. It was probably something more new age since that was used in the last decade. But with North Star's input, it seems like the opportunity, whether it's a road association meeting, lake association meeting, all of which usually have June dates on them, is all you need would be 4 minutes at that meeting to present the idea that here's this little card that has the website with the SurveyMonkey survey on it. 12 minutes to get through it when you visit that site, and that would just give us the opportunity, with North Star's help, perhaps to really get that get the depth of information we might well be after. As opposed to a more cursory or shallower or or shorter interview experience. So that's my 2 cents. I think that tool was really pretty effective and efficient and lets you get a little deeper than trying to present a lot of detail in person at a given meeting.
I think the best we can do at the in-person meetings is be a face at that point to the people that we're speaking with, to engage them and to understand the context of what they see their important pieces of information to be. So I think this a Survey Monkey, a card that gets them to a Survey Monkey is going to give us the metrics that we need to help. But our presence is what's going to set the tone for the rest of this, and whether they're going to engage with us again and feel like they were heard when they said, my most important thing for Raymond is water quality, or and let's look at the school water. And they're going to talk about the hot issues right now, and so we might not see some of these more deeper structured topics that we're talking about now. And so I think we've just got to be prepared as the voice of the committee for that too, because I think we're going to be fielding as well as conversing.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Danielle, that it's that certainly the in-person, even if it's 4 or 5 minutes, is going to put a face on this committee. And that's half the battle as far as gaining trust and support of the community. Certainly, we also need to use tools that'll let us tap a general consensus as best we can. But my guess is that the goal is that this would be done, all be completed by the end of the summer or early autumn. I agree. It's going to be a task to try and get out individually to a lot of different organizations based on when they're available and how much time that they're going to allow us to have and the like. So it really is going to require a certain amount of flexibility on the committee's part to be able to someone to be able to go there and just present that face. Understand that we're doing our best to try and get the sense of what the town wants, and if we're successful and we get 10% of the town to give us that information, I guess we'd consider that ourselves as successful, given the busy nature of everybody's lives.
So what I'm hearing is I think we should put together some questions that can be done electronically and get a link for that. I'm also hearing that we should probably reach out to as many of these organizations as we can and say, when's your next meeting? Because in order for us to determine, if what we can go to physically or try to be a presence, that we need to know when these are. So I think that seems to be a task that we should be doing, now.
So how do
I mean, it was a pretty lengthy list of contacts. Maybe we need to just break it down into equal parts and say, assign them to individuals so that we can all kind of start chipping away and trying to make contact with who we can.
Well, I think also there are a fair amount of individual businesses and individuals on there. So, they may not necessarily have a meeting. So I think we should.
Well, it could be inviting them to a meeting, even maybe like a
Inviting them
Zoom
to-
session or something like that, where you could get a group of people who may not otherwise be together to come together in this certain
I think
setting.
sort of for business owners, we could be shooting out that email with the
Yeah.
survey link. For associations, we'd be saying, when's your next meeting? This is who we are, when's your next meeting? We'd like to be involved, or at least put forth some questions, and here's why. And other, of those kind of organizations, not just the associations.
And I hesitate to offer up a form letter because I think those are easy to ignore. But I think if we have something structured that goes out, we don't necessarily have to be reinventing a new communication for each individual contact on the list.
So would it be reasonable if we're not going to be necessarily in the Roadrunner soliciting any additional pictures right now? Could we just replace that with, if we could come up with 4 or 5 road associations, clean water associations, recreation associations, that sort of thing, and kind of just use those as general topics, and in the ad just announce, we are the Comprehensive Plan Committee and we are looking for your input, and that'd be a way to get it out as well. I mean, we do have that option with the Roadrunner, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, just you don't know what those ads will do, except we got quite a few pictures.
And they do go in every home, so, right.
So that might be another approach to getting it out there. I would tell you, taking a list individually and just making some calls or whatever. I've always found if nothing else, that's a way of marketing yourself. I mean, you want to know who we are. With the Comprehensive Plan Committee, we'd like, 2 minutes of your time to find out where you think the future of Raymond's going. Click. Next
The
one.
Roadrunner
Yeah.
might take a little bit of explanation for a second here, and that's once a month, we have a 2-page spread in the Wyndham Eagle, and the Wyndham Eagle is sent to every household in Raymond.
Yep.
And by we, I mean the town, and the town has said that the comprehensive plan can put stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that is a great tool, and it's a great way for like broad kind of awareness. We have access to MailChimp. It's a email service. So with this group and the town's permission, some of these emails we could put into that system for newsletter purposes, or just, hey, make sure you come to the meeting next week. Those kinds of reminders and updates as part of our normal communication and building a list of stakeholders. We also use online polling services. It might require a little more coordination with the town. We have spoken with the person in charge of the website. Kate's been coordinating a little bit to get that going. It is not
He has his end ready, he told me just before the meeting.
okay. Thank you. Our end is not ready, so that is still in process. But having a QR code or a link on that page that would take you to a survey, I'm not sure, again, maybe the town already has a subscription to something like SurveyMonkey.
I don't believe so, but I think we
so,
have.
but we can make
but we-
QR codes if I recollect
We can make
correctly.
QR codes, yes.
Right. So, whether it's the town doing that or whether it's us doing that, and, we'll need to coordinate on that. But I think our vision here, at least on our end, is that through some broad awareness in print and through some email marketing, we could get a pretty good response, or at least awareness of an online survey tool that people could go to and fill out. And I think I did hear someone say, maybe that would allow us to go beyond kind of the 4 basic high-level questions and ask for a little more detail. If people, don't need to stand there over someone's shoulder while they fill something out on paper, they can fill it out on their own time, maybe a few days even after they first hear of it. So to the extent that this group has the results from prior polling work, we'd love to incorporate those, see what kind of questions have been asked. Maybe we want to ask the same questions again and build on that, or maybe it's depending on if it was a really good response rate. We don't want to ask the same people the same questions over and over, but maybe we can just knowing what the responses and questions were, we can make some decisions around that.
It was basically one question, pick your top 3 priorities.
Perfect.
And
But
we had,
in 2014, there was the community survey.
oh, right, so.
That's online.
So we also, this would be in addition to a more very in-depth survey, or this would be that.
This, at this early stage, would probably not be a very in-depth survey. It might be more than what do you like and what's your favorite place kind of thing. But we don't have a lot at this point like we'll have in the fall for people to react to. Like say, hey, here's what we've learned about where housing's happening, how much is being built. Here's what we've learned about open space in town. What do you think about that? I think at least from our perspective, we don't know those things yet. Maybe you all have a sense of certain aspects of those. So that's why we're coming at this more from trying to really articulate what are those like underlying values and longer term vision kind of questions, as opposed to this is what's happening. Is that good or not good? Or do you want to see more of this and less of this, or vice versa?
So Ben, if I understand what you're saying, and I think I do, it's that the higher level questions, the broader questions that we will get earlier on, that is really what's necessary to formulate a vision statement.
Correct.
It's not really in the detail. In the detail is in the chapters and the like.
Right. So the stage of the work that we're in at this point is in task 1 and 2 is really the broader, more foundational vision. And once we have a sense of where the community wants to be going in the next 15 or 20 years, we can start to look at the specific policies and strategies to start moving in that direction. So things like impact fees are a strategy that you could use to incentivize housing in certain locations and disincentivize it in others. It's a strategy you can use to fund capital expenses as part of a capital improvement plan. But there's lots of other tools too. So, I didn't want to jump in too early on the impact fee discussion, but where I see this group is really more of like we're at the beginning of a project that's going to be about another year and a half, and we need to do the work that it's going to take to understand existing conditions and what are the trends around all those inventory chapters that I know you're somewhat familiar with, and then articulate a vision statement that people can react to and say, yeah, that's Raymond, or no, you didn't quite hit the mark with this part of it, let's talk about this. And then once we get a vision statement, we can start to think about what that means for future land use. And essentially, the future land use plan is that vision statement on a map. It's starting to, when we talk about open space and economy, this is what it means for this part of town, this is what it means for the other part of town. And we're going to have strategies and policies recommended to start helping make those things happen. So to me, when we talk about things like impact fees or zoning or those kinds of things, those are ways to implement or make progress toward a vision where, Sam and I are still kind of back at the beginning where we're like, what is the vision? Like, we know there's a vision statement in the current plan. Does that still ring true for folks? What parts of that need to be updated? And once we get a sense of that, we can talk about some of those other things that may have changed in that intervening time. I think I mentioned at a meeting or so ago, the vision statement and the values might not be very different than they were the last time the town went through this process, but a lot has changed in town, and a lot has changed around the town that have impacts on how the town might want to approach the challenges and opportunities that it's going to be facing. So I guess this is a long way of saying we are still, I think, at this phase where we need to have more of those foundational, broad kind of perspectives that'll help inform the vision and the specific recommendations going forward that we'll get to, in the fall and next winter.
Maybe so are all these discussions then just based off of what our old vision statement is and extracting the big pictures from those, and we develop our questions around those and say, does this still ring true? Is it that simple, or are we?
Well, our vision statement, I took a little look at ours versus maybe others. So our 2004 vision statement to me was just a little different. It was more, I can actually summarize it. Hold on. It had such things as every inhabitant of the town of Raymond deserves and should be afforded privacy, the right to peace and well-being, security, education, and an unspoiled environment, public safety, and guaranteed democratic freedom. When I looked at Gray's vision statement, they, of course that's updated, had things like, we want to maintain the small town feel. It was more based on, in my mind, their core values with an action plan in a way, where ours were more focused just on a complete ideology. Another example was of our vision statement from 2004 is we seek a fair and just community where all citizens have equal rights, where people want to raise families, where children can receive an excellent education and so forth. So to me, that's a lot different. To me, that's saying, we want a blissful community, but to me, it doesn't have sort of any action item to back that up. Like we want to keep this, community by doing this. Where I thought Gray's differed. It seemed to encompass the same things we're saying, but with an action behind it. So I think our vision statement from 2004 was a bit different than probably something we may be looking to do moving forward.
Well, it seems too with these beginning conversations that it's more of a like setting the stage as this is the beginning of a conversation. Share with us now and we'll share with you later. You can share with it's the beginning of a conversation, not just a one-time fill it out and we're good with that. That when we have more information that will guide further discussion topics as we get further through the process.
So my reaction to the vision statement is there are some values there, and those are things that you can build a vision on. But my hope is we'll be able to start to identify in the vision things that are unique about Raymond. What does it mean for certain places in town? I think one of the things in that Gray Plan, I worked on the Gray Plan was a tour through Gray in the future. So if you go back, what are the parts of town that are going to look very similar to the way they do now? What are the places that are going to be different, and how are they different? And then you can start to think about what kind of policies and things that you would need to do to start making those things happen, whether it's focusing change or focusing, there are things you need to do if you want to keep things the same. You can't just leave them alone. So thinking about those kinds of things is, I think, what's going to get to some of those really good implementation strategies. And, what can the town manager do to make this happen? What can the select board do? What can the planning board do? As opposed to, if you just identify values and don't go much further, to your point, it's kind of like, okay, now what? How do we make this happen?
That's what I saw. I mean, I was just like, okay, that's great, but what?
Yeah, it's
what comes now?
Yeah, you have to have those things in the mix, and they, again, are part of. I often talk about values and visions. It's like, what are those core things that kind of allow Raymond to be Raymond. It wouldn't be Raymond if it didn't have certain places or people didn't treat each other a certain way. So that's all part of it.
And Ben, to your point about as far as things have changed since 2004, and the expectation, and I think the anticipation that we'll have when we start getting feedback from the community, as I recall from memory, having read that 2004 mission statement, as an example, the word sustainability wasn't used once. What do you think the chances are we're going to poll this community in this day and age, and there's not going to be someone saying something about sustainability? So it really isn't just taking what was, and reproducing it, but taking those elements that do have value, that still have value. And my sense is, it's really, we've already polled ourselves, Ben, on, so before we did the election thing, we polled the committee on each of our 3 top priorities of the 7 or 8 as they were. So we got a fairly good sense of where this committee was coming from. It was pretty consistent as far as what we ranked, at least as the number 1 or number 2.
I think it's worth looking at the vision statement in conjunction with what that list is, because the list that we voted on, to me, doesn't necessarily reflect, to a certain extent, it can reflect some core values, but it's also structured categories.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Like
you
I
know,
say,
it doesn't have the heart, doesn't necessarily have the
it came
heart
from
of
a
it.
state
Yeah.
document. I mean, those questions basically they
Yeah.
came from the growth management.
Yeah, so I think joining of those two, a
Yep.
blending of those two, that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I agree with that. This may be hopefully not out of order, but I was going to ask this before when we were talking with Ben about the impact fees. Just for the record, unless it has escaped me somehow in emails and the like, North Star has signed a contract with the town of Raymond, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Everybody knows that. We assumed it, but I don't think I received anything that officially
Yeah.
told me.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did get a copy of it, I should have sent it out to you.
Oh,
I'll send
okay.
it out tomorrow.
That's fine. It's just
So
information.
that's happened in the last like week or
Yeah,
10
week or
days
so,
or so. So we are talking about things that we've started to do, like the website that aren't done yet. So there's we are now in this pool with both feet and getting going, but we are still not too far out of the starting blocks, I guess. So one of the things that I also want to do before we leave this task 1 discussion too much is to related to stakeholders. We have a long list of businesses and a long list of associations in the packet tonight, but I'll send something over, and maybe this could be homework before the next meeting. If you could think of, often at this early stage of a project like this, we try and think of like who are the categories of people, the stakeholders to this effort that we want to make sure we hear from, and whether it's school community or certain geographic locations in town, or if it's members of groups that we might not hear too much from in normal planning work, just to start to categorize like who are those groups. And then the next stage is, okay, so if we're talking about youth sports, again, as an example, what are the youth sports organizations? Or if we're talking about recreation, do we have like the snowmobile club or some kind of outing club or lake associations? I know we've got a really good handle on. And then the next level is like who specifically at each of those organizations? Do we have a name and a name and an email that we can add? So building out, I think, what we have the start of here in a more thoughtful way at the beginning is going to be good.
So I think a lot of that actually we kind of already have in a way. Our April 5th packet has sort of a list where it says residents and property owners, business owners. Then it has some associations, Raymond Food Pantry and Raymond Casco Historical Society, PTO, Age Friendly, Raymond's Lion Club. And some have at least a website, but I'm sure we can find some email addresses. So I think we just need to complete the list.
Right.
That makes sense.
So we can build on that and kind of like flesh that out. I think by the time we come back for our next meeting, our hope is this is going to grow. We're going to like keep adding names to this list, and we're going to keep hearing from more people through the course of the whole project. But as we get started, it would be good to have like that thoughtful exercise of who needs to have some seat at the table at a certain portion, whether they're just kind of getting email updates, or whether, you know, someone needs to go out and talk to the snowmobile club, or someone needs to go talk to the principal at the middle school to, you know, make sure that we have a sense of what's going on, and they know what this group is up to. So that stakeholder identification is part of like the broader, and this is my last thing on this item, is a public participation plan. The website is part of the public participation plan. The survey is part of the public participation plan. We're going to provide a draft document that incorporates how we want to reach out to folks at each stage of this project, so that we have a sense of when the big meetings are going to be, when you know, email newsletters might go out, when surveys would happen, so that we can kind of like map out the work at this stage, knowing that, you know, we can update it later if we need to, or if we find that, you know, the last email survey didn't work as well as we thought, we can go back to the drawing board and come up with an alternative. But I think that it would be a good exercise as well, not only to think about who, but how. And that's really what that document would start to lay out, and we can update it for discussion at the next meeting.
Ben, I'm just curious, as far as stakeholders and/or department head interviews, how do we handle a situation with a school board that's basically shared in two communities? Is it normal to sit down with the whole board, or it's just with the members from the community on the board?
I think you could, there's room to figure that out. I think whatever makes sense. Sometimes you might just have a conversation with the superintendent and say, you know, we want to have a conversation about Raymond specific issues, and what are the implications of Raymond issues on the district. So you could have that kind of conversation, or it might be a broader, like, conversation with board members. I think either way, an important part of that outreach is making those folks aware that this kind of long-term strategic plan is taking place, because that will also have implications on their work as they think about capacity, bus routes, you know, those kinds of policies.
I would think too, at this point in time, since there is, you know, plans for the middle school to join Wyndham and have that in the upcoming future, that it would make sense to look at the broader district at this point, you know, understand the timing and strategies and things that we need to consider when that sort of thing's happening.
Yep. And there may be different perspectives coming from a board member in Raymond versus a board member in Wyndham. And
May I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
One of the things the committee liked when we went out and started looking at other websites, other comp plans and whatnot, there was a video that had been done, what is a comp plan? And I don't recall if that was one that you had been involved in. And
It is.
it was the Gray website.
It was
Yeah,
the Gray
that's right, it
website.
was the Gray website.
Had the cute little figures in it.
And in thinking about what you said about the broadness of the questions to begin with, and possibly having a business card with a QR code, it seems like it would be pretty cool to have two QR codes, one that would take them to what is a comp plan, and another that would take them to the broader questions we want to ask. So that, because a lot of people don't know what a comprehensive plan is. Even some of the committee members, before signing up, weren't sure what on earth they were setting up for.
I still don't know.
Yeah. So I think that might be
Next time.
valuable to go out.
Got it.
Yeah, I think there was actually in the Gray website was just like a minute and a half. It was a stick figure along with pictures, and basically just like a slideshow saying what is a comp plan, that sort of a thing. And there was a link then to a survey.
Yeah, we really like that. I think instead of us trying to articulate it over and over again and mess up, because I think we're still a little like, what is it?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of pictures that I've collected for the committee with that, but I've also got pictures that I've collected for the town report. So if you needed pictures of Raymond, I can supply.
Got it.
And we have a pilot in our midst with
Would it be possible to have that video as the first piece of the questionnaire, so that when they click on the link, it takes them there and that plays, so they have an idea of what they're signing up for when they fill out the questionnaires?
It's a good idea.
That's a really good idea. I like it because, you might stop at one, or just as long as it's kept really short, because you don't
A
want to
minute
be
and a
losing,
half.
losing their attention.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think
I
that's a
like it.
great idea, is
Gotcha.
combining it into, if that's possible.
I think there's ways to do that. It's either, you could either do it as, here's the video, now take the survey, or click here for the survey, and then it's like, hey, welcome, here's the video, here's what this is for. Right. So we'll think more about that as we start to pull those things together.
Okay. That's a great idea.
Great. I don't know how much time we had to talk about the vision, outreach plans, or website, but those were the big things I wanted to cover, essentially to kind of set the stage, let you know there's a little homework coming in the next week or so that hopefully you have time to engage with before the next meeting as we try and catch up with the train that's already rolling. Thanks.
Yeah.
Then the next thing was the inventory chapter work. That's concurrent with that. Sam, do you want to say a few things?
So, the inventory chapters are the most substantial part of the plan, and it's really the looking back part to see how Raymond has changed over time. And chapters deal with transportation, housing, natural resources, water resources. There's 13 of them, and for each chapter you're required to answer a series of state questions required in the Growth Management Act. So this section of the plan is going to be where we probably are going to lean on committee members and local knowledge the most, especially on questions that we are unable to answer from state data packs. So I don't know if anybody has had the chance to review the plan from 2004, but it seems like, as I'm hearing discussion today, that a lot of issues brought up in that plan could still be relevant today, especially pertaining to like water quality from aging septic, and now with climate change impacts, that's going to be even more of a problem. High cost of housing, aging population, also struggling to direct growth away from rural areas was a key issue brought up as well. So with this section of the plan, what we're wondering is whether the committee would prefer to receive a couple chapters at a time and go through them at meetings all together, or if we should send them the chapters all at once and you guys review them on your own time and then email us comments and we'll incorporate those comments. So I guess two questions in that is like whether you prefer to go through these in batches, so 2 or 3 at a time. And then the second question is whether you prefer to go through chapters at regularly scheduled meetings, or if you prefer to review them on your own and then give us comments as you go through them.
What would you say the time frame, an ideal time frame to get them all kind of done? Would you say it's kind of by the end of the summer? Because if that was the case, then we would have to move a little more quickly, maybe a couple each meeting, as opposed to, obviously you didn't say one meeting, but that would take us a year, for example.
Yeah, we had blocked off 6 months to complete all the inventory chapters, and that kind of works out, you know, to be about a couple a month, which on that schedule, what's that come out to? I think it's around August, maybe September. I was looking at
The
that.
original scope was August. That did imply a March start date for the inventory work. So I guess with that in mind, it could be more like September or October.
So, you know, we are going to make regular, steady progress on these chapters over the coming months. And I think part of Sam's question, I think, what I heard anyway, was, will there be enough time during the regularly scheduled once a month, 2-hour sessions to review a couple chapters? You know, if we, even as a group, if we took about a half hour for each chapter and you're doing 2 a month, that's like half your meeting time. And is that going to be like how this group moves the effort ahead? In some places, that is what people want to do. They really want to roll up their sleeves and engage with the chapters. And in other places, it's more of a just give us the highlights and tell us what the key findings are, as opposed to like getting, you know, into the editorial kind of like aspects of it, I guess.
So obviously we realize you are just getting your feet under you with starting with this. So based on this, just out of curiosity, would you have 1 to 2 chapters for us to start on by next meeting?
That's the plan. Is that now that we are fully engaged, that we would be ready to start sharing chapters with the group in June.
So the timeline really is that if we were to get started at the next meeting, we've got 5 regular meetings between now and the end of October. So as far as, you know, reasonably speaking, even if we did 2 every meeting,
Still tight.
we're still, I believe you said there were 13 chapters. So we'd still be probably a month's worth of work still left to go anyway. I'm just trying to formulate in my head.
Yeah, I mean,
2 chapters.
did that 13 include marine resources? Or, like, there might be a chapter or 2 on that state checklist that doesn't apply to Raymond.
I think it is 13
Okay.
total chapters with marine resources.
We would be doing 3 a month.
Yeah.
realistically.
So, you know, that kind of review is what we typically do and what we would recommend here, and you can let me know if this fits, is put these together primarily for completeness and making sure that they're factually correct. Like, those are our 2 main objectives with these chapters as a first draft. And we would draft these up based on existing data from the state that comes from the state data packet that pulls from a number of sources like we talked about last meeting. And then we would send them to the town to kind of update, truth check, that kind of thing. And then we would convert those into a PDF document that we could share with the committee, and you can comment on those documents as a first draft.
Do I understand, Ben, you said that your process is that the first draft goes to the town? You mean town government?
Correct. So to Chris and Don and Sue and relevant departments to make sure that our numbers from the state on timber harvesting or TIF districts or whatever else are going to be factually correct, and that they're complete from the standpoint of, you know, have we accounted for all of the information that needs to be in here. Classic example, the one that requires the most coordination with the town is public facilities and services, because that info doesn't exist at a state or federal level. Like, how big is the library? How many trucks are in the fire station? That kind of thing. So making sure that information is complete and accurate is the goal. And then once that threshold has been checked off, it can go to this group to say, well, why didn't you ask about the wildlife refuge, or your inventory doesn't include anything about this? Go back and make sure that the next version includes this other data, or make sure you include things
And
from.
we can use the checklist as far as completeness goes for the chapters.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm hearing is, like, let's say, I'm just trying to think this through. It's going to go to town staff first, then we're going to get it. I think if we were to realistically then discuss it in a meeting and try to get through 2 or 3 chapters a meeting to stay on pace, we'd need it also in advance. And well enough in advance of our meeting to have the time to look that over, formulate thoughts, so we can come to the table with those already in hand.
Yep.
Right? I'm thinking of this process
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
If we have them, say a few of them done and have those in your packets along with the agenda and have that go out a week before the meeting, that would give you a week to
that'd be
go through them.
I think that'd be adequate.
I do too. I feel
That
like,
should work.
sorry, John.
Agree that
Agreed.
we should be able to do that. 7 to 9 pages per chapter, roughly. I mean, and some are denser, but I think the fact that it would have already been vetted by town staff gives us a good reason to not take a terribly long amount of time.
Yeah, I would agree with
Right.
that. I think that the process is kind of the 99% of it. I'm sure is going to be accurate. I mean, it goes to
Yeah.
the town basically to see if there's some glaring typo or something that just is not accurate. But what I do worry about is, and that's why I asked about the town, is that does insert another party as far as the overall timeline is concerned. If there's a department head that's the only person that has that information happens to be at a fishing camp for a week,
Yeah.
that's a problem. And so that's why I was just asking. It goes to town first. It does make sense that the fact checks take place. But I agree with John. I think that for the most part, we can be pretty assured that the information in there is going to be accurate. I guess that the question I'd have is if it embedded in those chapters is there's something that any of us feel is a philosophy that doesn't reflect the values of the town or the goals of the town from the committee perspective.
Yeah, I guess for me, we would be looking at, are we missing something? Or is there something in here we just don't think, belongs? So I think if we're not spending our time fact-checking numbers, which takes time, and we're looking at the content as a whole, I don't think it's unreasonable if we have the materials a week in advance for us to do that in meetings.
Shouldn't be a problem. And we have the right to extend the meeting if we need to.
That's
By vote.
correct.
So my life is schedules. And I'm looking at, the next meeting is June 7th. And we would be sending it out, the packet out, instead of on the Friday before, the Wednesday before, to the committee. So that implies that it would need to go from you to the town and then back to you, so you could put it in whatever format or incorporate our changes potentially. You'd probably need a week to do that.
Yeah.
So that puts us back to the 24th.
Yeah.
So the town's going to take probably a couple of weeks realistically to go through,
Good.
to be able to put it in perspective of, we aren't just sitting there wondering what to do with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have to work it in amongst other obligations, and depending on which chapters you're doing, it could take a while to get through all the information to make sure it's correct, and in particular, Public Works.
Are there ones that are way
and
easier
whatnot.
that we could start
So-
with to get the ball, to get the train
Yeah.
on the tracks?
Yeah.
Like, there must be ones that don't involve as much legwork on the town's part to sort of get the process going.
Yeah, because we'd be looking at, if we could get things by the 10th, we could get it back to you by the 24th, and then you would have it ready for the 31st for me to send out to the committee.
Right. So for this first month, it's going to be pretty tight.
Yeah, that's,
But do you have thoughts, Sam, on chapters that might be a little bit, like Kayla was saying, either a little more straightforward or a little less burdensome for review?
Yeah, I think probably the historic resources chapter. That's usually a shorter one. Wouldn't really require a lot. Probably wouldn't even require a town second set of eyes from the town on that one.
Yeah, it's history.
Yeah.
Just Frank.
Well, natural resources would be state data coming down. The town's not going to change the lines on the aquifer map for the wetlands.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe Chris would have some input on that, but it seems like that would be a good one for us all to start with. History, as you said, Sam, history and natural resources. That's really couple of the founding aspects of the plan that probably will guide a fair amount of the remaining chapters. So that might be a good one to start with. Would be my suggestion.
I don't know how you do this on your own. I'm sure you have a great, business model and stuff, but I mean, obviously you could be sending these chapters as you're ready to the town, and we take them up when we're ready to take them up. So it's not every month like, oh, we're working on this
I'm
really
thinking
tight
more how to
Yeah.
get the ball rolling.
Like,
Right.
just get it going. Yeah.
I think what I'd like to do is send an overall breakdown of which chapters in which month as kind of like the blueprint for how we're going to approach this, because like Sam had said and like John had chimed in, there's certain chapters that are going to be less intensive than other chapters. Fiscal capacity is one that comes to my mind, where it's just pulling numbers out of the town report and understanding borrowing and those kinds of things. So there are chapters, and actually natural resources might be one that takes a little while to pull things together. It is all state data, and it probably hasn't changed a lot. The wetlands are where the wetlands are. The deer yards haven't been remapped in quite a long time. So some of that information, even though it's readily available, just might need to come from other sources. So we can send a schedule or a proposed order in which the chapters are coming to this group, and I think it would be a good thing, maybe a month or two in, to say, how is this working? Are we getting bogged down at these meetings? Do we need to have like a couple special meetings, or is there going to be a subcommittee or something like that? But I think that if it's just a couple, if it turns into 3 or 4 a month, that might be a different story. But if it's just a couple a month, and they've already had kind of a pre-check or certification from the town, from the standpoint of like, these numbers make sense to us, then that will leave, I think, the committee a little more free to say, what are the big questions we need? What is this telling us, or what are the highlights? Rather than worrying about, is this chart formatted properly, or are these the right numbers from the timber harvest in 2017? That kind of stuff.
I wanted to ask if we were doing 3 to meet the timeline as co-chairs, did you have, I don't know, looking forward and stuff, obviously there's always going to be stuff on the agenda, but would that allow us still enough time to do a couple of other things in the meeting without just focusing strictly on those 3 topics? And even if we want to just focus on those 3 topics, I just want to know if like you have plans, specific plans for this, or if like we spent the whole summer on just this and just kind of knocked it out, if that kind of also kind of frees you up from not trying to find things upon the agenda, but allows the agenda to be a little more straightforward. Like this is what we're doing tonight. We don't have to like go outside the agenda except to look at these specific items.
I think with plans for community outreach and trying to collect information from our community, we are going to have other things inherently that we need to talk about. collect our thoughts and talk through and make sure we're all sort of on par for what it is we're trying to get done. Sort of from here on out, the agenda setting is sort of a collaboration between North Star and sort of what, as a committee, we would like to make sure that we're working on moving forward. So I think that we would have, I'm assuming we're going to have more than just these chapters at our meetings. Peter?
So, Kelly, I would agree that it's a situation where from my perspective, it's how soon in advance of the meeting I can get the draft. You know, if we all get it in a reasonable amount of time prior to the meeting to review it. This group is pretty capable, I would think, of expediting things, bringing, you know, what your concerns were, or, you know, in some cases just a stamp of approval and it's good to go. But to me, it really just comes down to, you know, how far in advance I can get to look at the document. Understanding my time's a little freer than a lot of the people sitting around this table.
I typically need a few minutes to process something. I'm not really good at reading something and formulating very good thoughts after. I need a few minutes to like collect myself personally. So
I just,
that having that time beforehand.
I
is
just read
important
this
for
stuff
me.
and then I ask Greg.
There we go. I've always got an opinion.
So, I mean, we would have other things, yes, on our agenda, I would presume.
Okay.
Let's try it next month.
But I think what's important and checking in on that process and saying, is this working for us? Are we still meeting our other goals and objectives while doing this at the same time? And is this, you know, but without getting, I would say, a month or two under our belt with doing this, we're not going to know, because they're going to hit us with easy chapters.
Yes.
At first, and we're going to think, this is so easy. We've got this, you know, and then we're going to have big chapters that may be more challenging. But maybe, you know, just like you don't want all of the harder kids all in one class. Hopefully the way you design our timeline is so that we maybe have a hard and an easy or something. So it's not
Okay.
so.
And what would be helpful, as well as maybe looking at that data from the survey we did at the election, is, I mean, there's an excellent document, I don't know if you ran across it. Not only, as Sue had mentioned, there was a 2014 rather expensive community survey that was done. I know that's a decade ago, but it was very comprehensive, done by a firm out of Portland. And also, what we have is compliments to the 2010 implementation committee for the 2004 comprehensive plan, which is the plan we're currently working with. There's a matrix in there that's very detailed, saying, you know, they labeled what's a high priority for the community, what's a medium priority, what's a low priority, and then what's contained in that is outcomes. In other words, what was implemented, what wasn't implemented. It's all contained in that document. So, you know, I mean, reading it opened my eyes a little bit to, you know, oh, well.
You'll find those documents on raymondmaine.org.
Okay.
The comprehensive plan, if you click on the comprehensive plan logo on the front page, and then documents on that.
Okay. Yeah, great. I was actually wondering about that, about what has been implemented from the action strategies from the last
My understanding that there were 6 high priority areas identified in 2004 that were not implemented as of 2010. I don't know if that's a lot or a little, but the committee did a great job. The implementation committee did
Keeping
a great
track of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And I kind of assume, too, that if you gave the town 2 or 3 chapters, and one of them took longer, we just simply wouldn't give that to the committee yet.
That could very well be. Yeah. You know, I think the conversations that you're going to be having with people in town this summer about the future and looking ahead are going to be really interesting, and I hope that they're rewarding. This work, like Sam said, is looking back. It's kind of like an existing conditions. It's how we got to where we are, kind of things, and it's really more of I describe it as it's a big research project, a book report style, like listing of facts and figures and maps. So you know, I think you're gonna find, I hope you'll find that there's not a lot to, as long as the numbers are right and, we can pick out some relevant highlights together. What are the important aspects of these things? That's really where the work is. I think when we start talking about philosophy and recommendations and those kinds of things, we start with the inventory chapters, and then we like, hey, what does this mean for the future? Like, this is what's happened. Should it continue, or do we need to try and mitigate or do something differently?
So Ben, the analysis that you guys do isn't included in the chapters. The chapters is more the detail, and then later on in the plan, it's you would analyze the data and then strategies for implementation.
So a good example is the population and demographics chapter. There is some analysis of census data. So we'll go to these primary sources from the state and from the federal government about who lives here, how long they've lived here, education and income, and you can compare that to past, and so you can see how it's changed over time. So that level of analysis is again kind of comparing facts with facts and just trying to identify trends is the level of analysis. There's often a population projection included. So based on historical data and based on building permit data, here's a few projections of what the population might look like 10, 20 years from now. But it doesn't get into, what should we do about that? Or is that a good thing? It's just kind of laying this out and kind of setting the stage for those good conversations in the fall, in the winter.
So the schools have a lot of that data as far as...
Yeah, I'm sure they've got a school projection that would be a useful part of that chapter in particular. The chapter that Sam had mentioned is historic and archaeological resources. Again, there are certain identified resources that are known locations, and we talk a little bit about pre-European history and colonial history and maybe a little more recent history. But again, it's not a lot of judgments or implications. It's kind of like setting the stage so that when we put all of these chapters together at the end, we can start to get a picture of the town, tell a story to folks later this fall, and get some reactions to that.
Sure. The historical thing, I mean, we had our own in-house historian here, Ernie, for many years, and so that chapter is very little, in my opinion, that needs to be rewritten. It's history, so it's primarily done. But
yeah.
I did note that recently it was voted in the Portland Charter that there be a land acknowledgement, so that'd be something that probably we would want to include in our history.
That we talked about things that are topics and conversations that weren't part of past planning efforts. There's a lot of communities that are having those conversations today.
For a number of years, I was involved with inspections and certifications of hospitals, and what I can tell you is what the reviewers would say to me every time when I would ask them, what should I prepare for, and they would tell me, well, read the headlines in the papers for the last 3 months, and if there's something in the headlines about a hospital in Florida that took a leg off by accident, you should be sure that all your policies and procedures reflect that you have an identification process. So, and that always served me well. So.
Yeah, for what it's worth, in 2004, when I don't know if you remember Bob Fonts, he was the town planner, and he had a map of the town of Raymond, and I think what he put on it were just the homes where they were on the road map, and then he made a projection of what the number of houses would be by road on another map. I don't know whatever happened to that, and I don't remember how far ahead he was projecting how many houses would be in the town, but it'd be interesting to see how accurate his projection was. Remember thinking of it back then, it seemed pretty reasonable. And I even remember, I think it was your mom, John, that looked at that and said, gee, that doesn't look so bad. But do you
Coming from
remember
her,
that?
wow. I do remember that map, and as I recall, we called it the measles map because
Yeah,
it was
probably did.
red dots, and he
Red
walked it forward from the the first USGS map, and before that, even in the late 1700s, I think, right up to current data, and then forward in time to perhaps where we are now. So a great point, Greg, and we should dig that up for.
Yes.
I don't know where it would be.
It's in that 2010 document on the implementation committee.
Implementation.
All those GIS maps are there.
Yeah.
In the
That one's there?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that. I've seen those. I haven't seen Raymond's, but I do know Bob's work in other communities. I had a chance to work with him on a project in the Mid-Coast several years ago when I was just getting started. And Wyndham did a similar series of maps based on that concept of showing a history of growth over time. And it's really neat when you get to the present day, and you do some of those projections, and you're like, hey, we got to put 300 more dots on this map. Where are they going to go? Or 500 more dots? Or it's a really compelling exercise. That progression, really, you can see people's eyes open up and like, oh my gosh, look how much has changed over the years. The change that takes decades and decades is right in front of you. It's pretty interesting.
I see online we have them up. We have 2001 buildings in Raymond, Maine, but not a projection
Well, in the
past that.
implementation plan.
Yeah,
it'll be-
2010.
It was in that one.
Yeah, and that's in the
Implementation report.
on the documents page from the comprehensive plan.
A lot of beautiful maps there.
We had just real quick a projection in Wyndham. We did a high, medium, and low projection, and the high projection back in 2017 was we need to put, I think it was around 1,200 or 1,500 more dots on the map. And I said, boy, where are we going to put these 1,200 dots? And someone said Standish. So it's like, okay, well, I'm sure they'll have some dots of their own, but this is really what we're talking about here.
Didn't say Raymond.
Yeah, they didn't say Raymond. They said Standish.
I don't see it in the document that I posted.
Yes,
however.
I don't say.
No.
Just scrolled. I didn't see it. But that's okay. All right. Is that what you had for us tonight?
Yeah, our work will be to think about the schedule of chapters and start getting those produced right away.
Okay.
And my comments about the schedule are just thinking about the logistics of it. The town, the select board, the staff are all completely behind this project and certainly will be working on it. And I know Don would say that were he
Yes.
here. So,
Yep, thanks for that.
It looks like our homework includes compiling a more concrete list with email addresses, if possible, of stakeholders. Okay. Next meeting date, June 7th of 2023. Sue, just real quick, the website says that it starts at 5:30.
oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I just wanted
I
you to
will
know.
fix that.
Public comment? I see no public. Is that correct?
I see no public,
Okay.
yes.
All
Not on
right.
Zoom either.
And any of the committee plan members have a comment for this evening?
I think given the discussion around our tight time frame for this summer, it's worthwhile to think about our July meeting, which would be the first week of July, and the day after the 4th of July. I know I won't be present for that meeting. I'll be on vacation.
I'll be away.
And I, if we're trying to get it done in such a tight time frame, we should make sure we have a quorum, or try to think about a possible different date if that is an issue.
So we'll send out an email and see what people's availability are for that date and get an idea of where we be at, and then we can decide if it needs to be moved to a different date.
Yeah. I know for the sake of Sue wanting to get our space on the calendar, we probably want to decide that before the
Yep.
next meeting.
We'll we'll send something out to
Awesome.
get that squared away.
And right now, the select board is planning not to meet in July, if they can avoid it. So there may be that night available.
Okay.
I didn't even see when does that fall on? You just said it, didn't you?
The 5th is what is currently scheduled. The select board normally would meet on the 11th.
My daughter wouldn't like that. That's her birthday.
Hey, I came in here on my birthday.
Yeah, but that was her birthday. I wouldn't mind putting my birthday in here either, but I think her birthday might be a different question. She might be a little upset with me.
You could bring her.
I could, oh, that would be a blast. That would be a
I'll bring her a gift.
We could sing her.
Best
We could
birthday
sing to
present
her.
ever.
Have a cake.
I'll make the cake.
I guess I probably shouldn't say this because this is not a plug for something in Raymond, but today I had one of the best whoopie pies I've ever had. So if you get a chance to go to Kindred Farms and try their
yeah.
margarita whoopie pie,
What?
it was really good. And my standards for whoopie pies are high.
Kindred Farms will ruin whoopie pie, every other whoopie pie for you. They are
this met it.
amazing.
Wednesday is
Delicious.
whoopie pie.
It
day.
Yeah.
is. My
They
daughter
are-
won
my God,
not too many
just
weeks ago. Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yep. But the margarita one, they hit a home run. That's all I can say. So if there's, we bought quite a few, so there may not be any
My
left. But
neighbors
if there is,
My neighbors return Saturday. I've got to go to Kindred Farms tomorrow to get some whoopie
get
pies.
more
from
whoopie
them.
pies. Well, if they have margarita flavor, I highly suggest it. All right, Peter.
Yeah, just Sunday Telegram, April 30th. Town challenge state law meant to ease housing crisis.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you got a chance to see this,
I
but
did, yeah.
I'll just quote this one part of it. It was quite an article. It's about LD 2003. And it's just what caught my eye was Don Libby, a member of New Gloucester's Planning and Land Management Boards, said the town is trying to reconcile the mandates of the new law with its comprehensive plan, which includes efforts to increase housing in growth areas and protect water resources. So as this is, I kind of went on the website the other day to see, what rules had decided. I didn't see much of a big change in what the legislature under the rules, and this is implemented July 1st. So just to keep posted, I'm sure the planning board is staying on this, and I know Chris was talking with legal here as well about it.
That's where it was legal, last I know.
Yes, well, like I say, I think it was passed and it went to rulemaking, and it's out of rulemaking right now. And so as I read, how they were going to modify it, and there's a couple of other pieces of legislation, as I understand, that is currently out to modify this even further. As we talked about last time, I mean, this is a big home rule state. It's kind of part of the Constitution, I believe. So it's one of those things where we need to stay apprised of these situations, but at the same time, it's kind of like that conflict that we're going to be dealing with, which is, well, we can't stop growth. We want to manage growth. We want to try and direct growth to certain areas in town. I think if you review the 2004 efforts, what 2010 said is we failed at doing that. It just, I think it's important for this committee to keep this on their radar, because I think it's going to have issues down the road. I know that the select board has also received at least one draft proposal for seasonal, not seasonal, bed and breakfast and short-term, I believe that's it, short-term rentals in the town, which my understanding in talking with Chris is something that's every community is dealing with right now, especially those in the Lakes region. But at some point, the planning board's going to have to come up with some sort of proposals for ordinances, and then the town's got to decide where to go with it. My understanding is the proposal that was offered to the select board was pretty radical. They chose not to discuss it at all. There were a lot of people that showed up at that select board meeting that were concerned about it. And so, I mean, if we're taking surveys of the community or whatever, at least generally, my understanding is the select board meeting is attended like this is tonight, but it was full that night. So issues involving that short term, that's also going to have an impact on this, if I understand it. Chris is saying that he's seeing for the first time that individuals from out of state are buying lakefront property and basically converting it into short-term rentals for that purpose. I mean, that's what they're purchasing them for. And how does that impact the lakes? How does that impact parking? This legislation says that you can put another 25 by 28 foot building on any approved lot in the town except in the shorelands. And it's exempt from density, it's exempt from parking. That's
I would
pretty
imagine that would incentivize even more people to buy a property because they can throw a couple more units on there and rent them out. And
yeah, I mean, you know, the intention, as I understand it, from the governor and from the legislature when they put this in place was to increase access to affordable housing. Well, you know, I know that there's legal definitions, but I think it's certain. It's to me it seems kind of to be the definition of reasonable kind of has to do with the annual income of the people who live in the town. So, what is affordable? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we will know in a year or two. But anyway, it's in the news. Keep posted on it. And I'm sure that the planning board is all over it.
We were told to wait to hear from the attorney. That was the last conversation.
All right, July 1st.
all right, if that concludes the comments, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
And all in favor? All right. Thank you.